Hazel, I think you're still on mute.
Thank you.
There you go.
There we go. We're rolling. So my name is Hazel Scher, and I am the project manager on the consultant side. I work with Nelson Nygaard Consulting Associates, and working with the City of Commerce to lead the Commerce in Motion Transit Plan. So tonight we are going to learn a little bit about this project that we kicked off about a month ago, and learn a little bit about Commerce's transit services and the market for transit and commerce in terms of some of the demographic information and travel patterns. And then we're looking to hear from all the folks on the phone to give us a sense of what you'd like to see in terms of changes to the City of Commerce transit system, and talk about where we're going from here. So we'll do introductions in just a moment, but I just want to talk a little bit about sort of the meeting protocol. So for those of you that are maybe a bit less familiar with Zoom, we're asking that folks who are attending stay on mute during the presentation period. We will have a discussion period later in the later in the meeting. If you have a question about anything that you're seeing on the screen, go ahead and enter your questions into the chat function. Peter, who's also on the line, will be moderating the chat, and we'll be taking some breaks at various points in the meeting to make sure that we get those answers read aloud, or questions read aloud, and answer them as best we can. Once we get to the discussion portion of the meeting, feel free to also enter any questions that you have into the chat box or comments as well, and we'll make sure to get those read to the group. We can also use the raise hand feature if that's something that you would like to do. So Peter will be keeping track of where we might be seeing that. And once we get to a stopping point, we'll go ahead and call on you so you can ask your question directly. And just as a reminder, once you've asked your question, if you're not speaking, go ahead and put yourself back on mute just so that we can have a clear conversation for everybody to hear. So with that, like I said, we'll do a bit of introductions. We've got some folks from the city on the line, as well as a couple other folks working with me from Nelson Nygaard. So I'll kick it off to Peter to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Peter Soderberg. I'm Deputy Project Manager for Commerce in Motion. I work for the planning firm Nelson Nygaard. I've been with the firm for about 3 years now. And yeah, really excited to go over some of our initial work and start hearing from you about changes you want to see in the system.
And we also have Claude McFerguson from the City of Commerce.
Good evening, Claude McFerguson, Director of Transportation. Thanks for taking the time to participate in this virtual open house. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Nelson Nygaard for assisting us with this endeavor. Nelson Nygaard has a proven track record, years of experience, and we're fortunate to have them on board throughout this process. Commerce in Motion is the first step in developing a new and improved transportation plan. Your input and suggestions and feedback is crucial in delivering a quality transportation plan that meets the needs of our community and the region as a whole. This project is long overdue. However, I'm excited about the things to come, and collectively, I'm confident we can create something special. Thanks again for your time. I appreciate your feedback, and I will turn it back over to Hazel and her team to facilitate the meeting.
Great, thanks a lot. So Claude, that was a nice introduction, and we've got some of those sentiments right here on this first slide, that this is an opportunity for us to really take a step back and really understand various facets of the City of Commerce transit system, the commerce community, and what the mobility needs are in the community. And just kind of a caveat or a note to put out there is that we did a lot of technical analysis. We're in a bit of a strange time here with much of the region's travel going on hold because of the safer at home orders. And so the data that we looked at is primarily focused on trends that were taking place prior to COVID-19 pandemic. That helps us understand under normal circumstances how people are typically using the system. And though we definitely recognize that we most likely will not just return to how things were prior to March of this year, but that is more going to be a question of how do we rebuild and restart the system in a way that's going to best serve the community's needs. So We want to make sure that this process includes as much public involvement and feedback from the community as we can get. It's really important for us to hear about how transit can help get things moving for you and your daily travel needs, how it was working and not working prior to the pandemic, and really think about how Commerce in Motion can be an opportunity to transform and move the transit system forward to meet the community's mobility needs to the best possible degree. So one of the questions that we always start off with is trying to understand where people ride the bus today. So we've got a map here of the city and some of the major key destinations that people think of when they think of where you might need to go in Commerce. Some of them are city facilities such as the Senior Citizen Center, the Teen Center, City Hall for various civic engagements. There's also some major employers here with some industry and commercial centers throughout the city, headquarters for logistics and freight. And then we've got some medical facilities and schools, and also two of the biggest regional generators being the Citadel outlets and the Commerce Casino. So this map that I'm now showing on the screen shows on the fixed route service, the bus routes in Commerce, where do people typically ride and where are people getting on the bus? So on an average weekday, you can see that the most heavily utilized stop is at Commerce Center, the shopping center that's right on the border of East Los Angeles and the northern part of the city. We also see quite a bit of ridership at the Citadel outlets, and then concentrated in some of the neighborhoods in the Bristow area, the Rosewood Park, and then as well as some in Veterans Park and a little bit, but not as much well utilized in the Bandini neighborhood. So one of the things that is sort of a backdrop for this study that we are trying to make sure that we can address throughout this study is that the city's fixed route transit system has seen a decrease in ridership over the past several years, and it's a significant decrease of about 33%. So the lighter green, larger figures here show how that ridership trend has just changed in the last 6 years or so. And the smaller number down here is the Dial a Ride. The Dial a Ride is a service that's open to seniors and persons with disabilities, and it's a curb-to-curb service, so people can get picked up at their front door and go to the front door of the business or destination that they are trying to reach. So it's a much smaller number of people that use that service, but it's experienced a bit of a different trend over the same period as the fixed route service. So it was mirroring the fixed route service in terms of seeing a decline in ridership up until 2017. And in that year, the city changed its policy to allow people to make trips, not what was previously just trips that were being made to medical destinations, opened that up to be available to all trip types. People can take the service outside of the city of Commerce, which is not something that the fixed routes do, with the exceptions of connections to downtown LA on the Citadel Express. And so we really see that the usage of that service picked up when people were able to access a large variety of destinations. So we think that this is kind of an indicator, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, of something that we might think about on the fixed route service as well, to sort of expand the number of different destinations that you can reach by including some destinations outside of Commerce. Looks like we've got a little bit of a freeze here. There we go. So taking a slightly closer look at Commerce's services, on the left side, you can see the daily ridership on weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays for each of Commerce's fixed routes. And then at the very end there, also what that looks like on Dial a Ride. So the green route and the Citadel Express, those are the two highest ridership routes. In the case of the Citadel Express, there's actually more ridership on Saturdays and Sundays than there is on a weekday, which sort of mirrors what we understand about that route. It's a connection to downtown Los Angeles. People are riding it to go for some recreational shopping and in Commerce, and those types of activities often take place on the weekends. On the right side of the screen, you can see this chart is showing the number of boardings per revenue hour. So that's a measure of utilization or productivity, and sort of tells us how efficient the route is for the resources that you put into serving that route, how many people are riding it. And so Similarly, the highest performers are the green route and the red route. The Citadel Express is not as productive, and this has to do with the long segments that are operating on the freeway to connect to and from downtown LA. And there are a couple of routes that on weekdays are not quite as productive as we typically like. You see the Purple Route and the 26th Street Shuttle are both serving fewer than 10 passengers per hour. And while that's not, while they are sort of just below that threshold, it's typically, we're looking for something that's a little bit more robust and carrying a few more people per hour, something closer to the 15-person mark. So that's definitely something that we want to look at in terms of identifying opportunities to make the service more productive. This map here shows the ridership patterns on the Dial-A-Ride service. So the trips that we're looking at are from October 2019, and this shows all of the origins and destinations of various trips. And there were 321 trips taken on Dial-A-Ride that started and ended in the city of Commerce. We'll show you the ones that leave Commerce in a second. And you can see that most of those trips are concentrated, as you might imagine, around the senior center. People are coming and going from the Rosewood Senior Apartments, and other senior living facilities in the city, as well as some other destinations such as the Aquatic Center. Now, when we look at trips that were either starting or ending outside of Commerce, there's more than double the number of trips in the same period of time. So there's much more demand for trips that leave Commerce than there are for trips that start and end in Commerce. And there's quite a few different destinations. Many of them are medical facilities for dialysis, therapy, regular doctor's appointments. People, again, are starting and ending their trips at the senior living facilities. And then there's also some trips that are starting or ending at East LA College. And so this, while we're talking about a segment of the population that is typically older or with a permanent disability, and this may not reflect everyone's desires for travel, it does indicate to us that there's an opportunity when we think about making changes to the fixed route service to think about connecting people to places outside of Commerce that may be popular. We did some mapping based on census information. So what we're seeing here is the city limits of Commerce plus some of the areas immediately adjacent and the population density in those areas. So Commerce in 2020 had about 12,700 residents. Those residents are spread out between 4 different neighborhoods: Bristow, Bandini, Veterans Park, Rosewood Park. And in between those areas, there's really very little residential population. And that's why you're seeing that, at least on this map, that there's a very low density of residents in Commerce itself. When you look at the areas immediately adjacent to Commerce, though, in East LA, Maywood, Bell Gardens, there's much more concentrated residential density. On the flip side, looking at employment, Commerce stands out as having a lot of employment, whereas some of the areas outside of it are less densely concentrated with jobs. So there's 57,300 jobs in Commerce, almost or more than 4 times the number of residents. And so many of those people are coming from outside of the city to access those jobs. We know that there are some major key employers like the Citadel Outlets and the casino, but a lot of the employment is spread between smaller industrial and freight focused businesses that while they present a large number of jobs that people are looking to access, they're fairly dispersed. They're not large office towers necessarily, but more light industrial or heavy industrial business parks that tend to not be quite as concentrated in terms of having thousands of people accessing a single job site like you might see in an office tower in a central business district. So when we look at those together, this map now shows both the population density and the employment density. You can see that the population sort of gets washed out by the employment in Commerce, that there really is primarily a concentration of jobs in Commerce. However, in the areas immediately outside, it's a little bit more mixed. You have a mix of population and employment density. And so when we think about who is likely to use transit, sometimes we dig a little bit beyond just the pure population employment density numbers and think about different segments of the population. So of those 12,000 people that live in Commerce, about 20% of them live below the poverty threshold. Lower income people tend to be more likely to use transit because it's a better way to stretch their dollars further, not have to pay for a car payment or maintain a vehicle or pay for gas. 13% of the residents are over 65. So these are the people that have access to the dial-a-ride service. And so that, segment of the population is similar to other parts of LA County. Is a population that sort of has a tailored service, but also may be interested in using the fixed route because it goes to different locations or they don't have to schedule a ride in advance. We've also got 7% of residents that have disabilities. 9% of the households don't have access to a vehicle. Those often tend to also be people who use transit because it's a different way to get around. And then in terms of where people might be going, of those 57,000 jobs in commerce, 10,000 of them are the ones that we would classify as low wage. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a second, but this means jobs that pay less than $1,200 a month or $15,000 a year. These are jobs where it is typical to see people using transit to access those jobs because it's a more economical way to get to jobs. They're not spending the entirety of their paycheck on their transportation. So this is some of the opportunity that we see for tapping into a transit market to get people to those jobs. And then just to make sure we recognize that trip generators like the Citadel outlets and the Commerce Casino that are associated with recreational trips or shopping trips, those are not necessarily associated with home and work. And so we don't see those as high activity centers on this map, but we do know that they are an important part of the travel patterns in commerce. So I'm going to show a couple of maps that talk about travel patterns of people working and living in commerce in relation to the rest of the LA region. So the first map I'm showing here shows where people who are residents of commerce work. And I know it's a little bit hard to see, but there's sort of a light pink shaded area on the map, and that's City of Commerce. So you can see that there's a concentration of people that both live and work in commerce. So that's about 900 people. But the rest, so the 4,500 people, are commuting outside of city limits to other jobs. And it's not terribly concentrated in any specific location, but you can see, as you might expect, that there's a concentration of people that work in downtown Los Angeles. There's people that work in Vernon, also some smaller job concentrations in Montebello, to the east of Commerce. So those are areas, these are not necessarily transit riders. This is looking at all trip types. But we can see that there's a market for different connections between commerce and other parts of the region that we might consider if we're talking about bringing transit services outside of the city to access jobs. So this next map is similar to the map I just showed, but it's concentrating or it's focusing just on people who are low wage earners. So that's the group of jobs that pay $1,200 a month or less. And there are 300 people who live and work in commerce that access those jobs. And that to me is, a sort of an important group of people that we know that they are inside the city, that they have access to the existing transit service. And so one thing that we want to make sure that we're able to do with a local transit service is connect those people to jobs in an affordable way. And since City of Commerce transit is free, it is quite affordable. That same group of people, there are more of that same group of people that is accessing low-paying jobs outside of commerce, but it's quite dispersed. You can't see many major concentrations, and the locations are sort of stretched far and wide down through the gateway cities and downtown LA and throughout the San Gabriel Valley. So it's a little bit harder to pinpoint where you might put a transit service to serve those people. This next map that I'm showing looks at where the people who work in commerce live. And so as I mentioned before, there are about more than four times as many people more than four times as many jobs in commerce as there are people. So that's why this map looks quite a bit more busy, that we're looking at a lot more home locations of people that are accessing jobs in commerce. So we see that there are people that are living and working there, the same number, about 900 people. And then the real big concentrations are really right around commerce's borders. So you see concentration all along the northern border in East Los Angeles, to the east in Montebello, and then in all the other neighboring cities to the south, like Bell and Bell Gardens and Maywood and Huntington Park. So there is definitely an attraction of people that are nearby, but not immediately in commerce, that are accessing those jobs. And then there are some pockets of people who live further away, such as in the East Hollywood and Koreatown area, just to the west of downtown, along the 110 corridor, and further away than that. Again, drilling down to the subset of that group that is low earning, you can see that there are some areas that really it sort of focuses in on the areas that are just outside of Commerce. And this makes sense. I think typically longer commutes are more expensive, and people tend to, if they are trying to save money or have less access to transit, that they're trying to work near where they live. So you can see that East Los Angeles, Montebello, Bell Gardens, Maywood, and Cudahy, and all the communities immediately around Commerce is where you see some of those lower earning folks living. And that adds up to about 9,700 people. Not all of them are necessarily in that immediately adjacent area, but that is where we see some of the concentration. And the last bit that I want to sort of focus on is, when we're thinking about all these travel patterns, City of Commerce Transit is one piece in a much larger network of regional transit. And we have connections to some of the places that we were talking about already that exist through service on Metro Bus, which connects to the Gold Line and then to downtown LA, to major locations like Cal State LA, and all throughout the rest of the LA County. Also, Montebello bus lines provides a pretty direct connection to the Blue Line, as well to the east into Montebello and downtown LA. And then there's some other local services that connect to City of Commerce Transit. There is the El Sol shuttle in East Los Angeles. There's also some shuttles that don't immediately connect with Commerce to the south and west, but the communities of Maywood and Bell and Cudahy all have their own small, locally focused transit systems. And then on a much more regional scale, MetroLink connects to both Orange County and Riverside, and there are two different MetroLink stations in Commerce that have connections to those different communities. One thing to note about MetroLink service, though, is that it's very peak oriented, meaning that trains typically go into downtown LA in the morning and out of downtown LA in the afternoon. And so if your travel pattern doesn't match that, if you're trying to go from Commerce and go to the east or to the south in the morning, there aren't necessarily train connections to be made. So just kind of to wrap up some of the technical analysis that we did, the things that jump out from looking at all the maps and the trends is that Commerce is adjacent to dense neighborhoods, but because the existing routes don't serve those neighborhoods, we're not necessarily facilitating those connections on transit where they may need to be made. Commerce also has some really significant regional destinations, such as the Citadel and the casino. And so thinking about ways that we can not just connect locally to those, but also bring people in from the region, like the Citadel Express already does, is something that we want to think about as we move forward through this planning process. Knowing that Commerce is a major employment center is also a key driver. We're not just talking about the 12,000 people that live in Commerce, but we're talking about the 55,000, 56,000 people that might be wanting to access Commerce on a daily basis to get to work. And that because LA's rail system has expanded in the past decade or so with the Gold Line and other routes, other extensions in the works, there's some untapped potential in terms of connections to regional transit. Right now, none of Commerce's routes serve the Gold Line directly. You can get there on a Metro bus, but maybe there are opportunities to create that direct connection for people on City of Commerce Transit. Now, balancing out some of those opportunities, there are some challenges. There is a relatively small population in Commerce, and this is a local system, and we want to make sure that we serve those people as well as we can. So there's always going to be some trade-offs between creating services that are designed to serve the residents of Commerce versus potentially serving more people or a different group of people that are outside of Commerce and getting them into the city to access jobs. There's definitely been a trend of people that have moved away from using transit service. The population in Commerce has remained fairly steady over the past several decades, but we're seeing such a significant decrease over the past 6 years. That tells us that it's not necessarily because there are fewer people in Commerce, it's because preferences are changing and people may have an easier time owning a vehicle, or they may have different ways that they prefer to get around, whether it's taking different transit services or taking different modes of transportation. Now, the decline in ridership, I should have mentioned this earlier, something that has been experienced across LA County and the rest of the country. It's not just City of Commerce Transit that's seen that ridership decline. And we've done a lot of thinking in this region about how we can get people to return to transit And definitely some of the things that it comes down to are thinking about how to make transit a positive experience. And so those are some of the things that we want to think about as well. And finally, something to point out is that, when you look at Commerce's routes on a map, you might look at them and say, I'm not really sure I understand where that route goes or what the network is that how I get from point A to point B. And some of that has to do with just the physical and geographical constraints that Commerce, that the layout of Commerce has. And there's such a large concentration of freight and rail and freeways in Commerce that there just tend to be quite a few barriers in terms of on and off ramps and rail spurs that create a little bit of a disjointed street network, and that can add to travel times once you're on board the bus. It's something that cars also face as well, but just can be a little bit more difficult. It's not an even grid like some other cities are that makes it a little easier to get around. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if we've got any questions in the chat box, or if anybody wants to raise their hand for a question right now, and Peter will take that away.
So it looks like we have a question in the comment box about dial-a-ride service. The commenter is legally blind and registered for dial-a-ride service 2 years ago, but hasn't been able to schedule a ride. Their doctor's office is outside of the riding area and don't want to plan a recreational trip a month in advance for shopping. So
I think that, as we've seen that the usage of dial-a-ride really has increased over the past 3 years. I'm assuming that this is referring to, that there is a lack of availability maybe for trips that are needing to be made. And definitely one of the things that is associated with taking transit service, specifically demand response service, is the need to schedule a ride in advance. I will say that, the fact that Commerce provides free trips outside of the city limits for up to 12 miles is unusual. That's a pretty wide service area that people have access to. And for that reason, it's popular and maybe seeing some capacity constraints. But, I think what we would be looking at is, are there opportunities to provide better access to better connections or interfaces with access services, which does do trips throughout the county? Or are there potentially opportunities to create fixed route connections that are easy enough to use to help facilitate those trips to an area outside of Commerce?
And we got one more question also about dial-a-ride service, which is, how is the city funding dial-a-ride services? And are we aware of the state's Clean Mobility Options Voucher program that could possibly give funding to ride-on-demand services? So I'm going to pass that question along to Claude. I believe that to answer the first part of the question, the city funds its transit services through a mix of state and federal and local funds, just like it funds its fixed route service. So dial-a-ride is, eligible for, as a public transit agency, eligible for funds from the Federal Transit Administration, also the State of California's Transit Development Act. I'm not personally familiar with the program that was mentioned, and so maybe if Claude, is that something that you have been discussing at the city? Claude, it looks like you're on mute still.
Oh, my apology. No, I'm not familiar with that program as well, but if that caller can forward us some insight, we're definitely looking into it if we can access additional funding for the dial-a-ride program. Appreciate the input.
And I'll add that they did provide a link to the program, so I can share that as well.
Got it. Thank you very much. I'll follow up.
So I'm not seeing any hands raised. Hazel, would you mind taking a look at the participants panel just in case it's not showing up for me since you're the host?
Doesn't look like we've got any. So I will move on to we're going to move through a couple of discussion questions that we are, hoping to hear from you all on. So before we get started, just a little bit of background information, especially for anybody on the phone that currently uses Commerce's transit service. Because of the pandemic, transit agencies across the region and in Commerce as well have seen a huge decline in their ridership. People are not going out for their regular shopping trips. They're not going out for their to access work or to, in terms of, children going to school and accessing activities. And so To respond to that, Commerce has done made some changes to its service, and there have also been some additional changes to bus service provided by other operators in Commerce. So at today, the orange, purple, yellow, and yellow routes that operate on weekdays are no longer operating temporarily. And also the church route that operates on Sundays is not in service. Also, Metro's line 258, which runs through Commerce, is operating less frequently than it normally does. It normally runs about every 30 to 40 minutes, and right now is running every 60 minutes. And then Metrolink train service has been reduced, with one of the westbound trips being suspended and 2 of the eastbound trips. And I say that because I just want to acknowledge that we're kind of in an in-between stage talking about what you might need right now to make transit better in response to some of the changes that have been made recently as a result of the pandemic. And we certainly want to hear about those, but we also want to try to think a little bit more broadly about how we can take the transit service that existed prior to March of this year and transform it into something once all of the restrictions on travel have opened up and that people are accessing their jobs and their daily activities in a way that is a little bit more traditional, how we can transform the system that existed previously to something that is going to meet the needs of the community going forward. So with that, I will move to our first question, and this is everybody's opportunity to have their voice heard and ask questions and jump in. So I definitely encourage you to take yourself off mute, raise your hand, put something in the chat box. So for those on the phone, how do you use transit, and how has the pandemic changed the way that you use transit? So I'm not seeing anybody jump in. Peter, are you seeing any comments here?
Nope, nothing yet.
So I'll start out. I live in the East Hollywood neighborhood of Los Angeles, and I work in downtown LA, and usually I take the Metro Rail Red Line to work. And as Peter and I were discussing earlier today, I have not ridden the train since about March 15th. So it's been a big shift for me. I know that Metro is planning on maintaining that service, and so when I'm going back into the office every day, I'll be using it. I'm wondering who else on the phone takes transit to work, or usually takes transit to work.
I got one comment in, mostly telecommuting daily, but used to take the A line, blue line.
And so the blue line does not serve Commerce directly. I'm wondering, do you take Commerce Transit to connect to the blue line? All right, we may not have full audio functionality with some of our participants. So I'll just move on to our next discussion question. And these are questions that we also have. I'll just say we have an online survey running that I will provide a link to at the end of the meeting. We want to hear from you in any way that makes sense and that you're comfortable with. And so many of these questions are part of our online survey. So definitely encourage you to, if you're not speaking up here, to chime in there. So the next question is, does City of Commerce Transit go to the right places? And if not, where would you like it to go? So I suppose one of the comments that we got earlier in the presentation was a desire to get to a doctor's clinic or a doctor's appointment that's outside of the service area. Is there anybody else on the call that wants to sort of suggest a place that service might connect to, either based on your own needs or things that you hear from your friends or relatives or from the data that we've shown earlier in the presentation?
We did just get another comment in about depending on household members to drive and also using City Bus to get kids from school to home and using the Citadel Express often.
Got it. So I'm wondering if the Citadel Express is something that you use to access downtown LA? And if so, because it goes both directions, some people are using it to get to the Citadel, some people are using it to get to downtown. So what types of things in downtown LA are you looking to access? So it looks like we've got a comment coming from somebody viewing through our Facebook feed. One participant has said we need to add a last bus to the Commerce Center route so people can shop until the stores close. So that's a great comment. Definitely, we always want to make sure that the services are provided in timeframes that are convenient for the places that you're trying to access. So thank you for that comment. And then there was another question. Any chance of a European-style system of local bike loan program for concentrated neighborhoods for light local trips? And so to respond to that, so there's been a lot of different bike share systems. LA Metro has a bike share system. There's been some private operators such as Jump and a number of others that are both doing bikes and scooters in different parts of LA County. So we're focusing on the transit systems of the buses for this study. So I'm not actually sure what City of Commerce is doing in terms of its active transportation options. Claude or Alyssa, do you guys want to answer that question?
Yes, our Economic Development Department is currently working on a grant as we speak to address the bike sharing and bike path throughout the city. I think the grant is scheduled to close in August, so they're actively pursuing fundings to get that available within our city. I will pass that information along as well to our Economic Development Director, and hopefully if they call or leave that information, I can have them follow up and give them additional feedback of where we at as far as that project.
Thanks, Claude.
And it looks like one more comment on how people use transit, using Citadel Express to get to LA Live, the Convention Center, and Fig at 7th, as well as getting back home. And any plans to have the bus announce the color or the route when making stops?
So I think typically on board, there are stop announcements as a bus approaches each stop so that riders are aware of where the bus is along its route. I definitely can understand the comment about being difficult to read the bus color and description. I think one thing that is, like I said before, is challenging is that the street network in Commerce has quite a few different arterials that are converging at angles, and so some of the intersections may be hard to navigate, and the bus routes don't necessarily have a straight line that they can go to get from one side of the city to another. I think that it's a great comment that there's a need to sort of make things a little bit more legible and easy to understand, and certainly a part of that could be incorporating it not just into the way that the materials are displayed, but into the announcements. So thanks for that comment. So I'll go to our next comment, but mostly, or next question, but really just kind of want to open it up to the folks on the phone. I see that there are a few names that we haven't heard much from, and I definitely want to know, for those of you who either use the transit system or are interested in using the transit system, we really want to hear your feedback, and we are interested in anything, whether it's a comment about the existing service or something that you've been thinking about that would help you get to where you need to go. So, here's kind of a prompt of what type of improvements would you like to see. There are a couple options here, but really I just want to hear from you. Is there anybody that wants to make a comment on the phone? And just in case, if anybody wants to just take themselves off mute, make sure that that if we can hear you, in case anybody's speaking up.
Looks like we may have a comment coming in from Facebook. Yeah, better times to facilitate shopping at Commerce Center for later hours.
Great. Yeah, that's something that, like, I think we heard that one from somebody else, that we've got some opportunity to maybe extend the service span, running the buses a bit later to make sure that people can shop throughout the day, that those stores are open.
And an improvement to have buses make announcement at stops for those waiting, not just those on board the bus. Easier to read signage at stops, including times, possibly a digital display.
Great. Yeah, I think that's in line with some of the comments. Like I said, we also have an onboard survey running, and I do think that we've heard from some folks that there's an interest in having some more amenities at bus stops. And so that's a great comment. Thank you.
Easier feedback ability on the transportation program.
So I'm not sure exactly what this refers to. I would just say that you know, we've got folks from the city's transportation department on the phone, and this is an opportunity for us to hear from you and on an ongoing basis. However, there is you know, the city staff is available to answer questions and take comments about transit service. And Alyssa or Claude, if either of you want to run through what those options are for collecting feedback on an ongoing basis, feel free.
Hi, I have a question. I live in Pasadena, and I work at the Citadel. And I had considered taking the Gold Line to downtown LA and then catching the Citadel Express. But if I did that, it would take like 2 hours or over 2 hours. And so, so I'm one of those commuters that goes down Atlantic all the way to the Citadel. Does the Citadel Express get a lot of folks from the stop in downtown LA, and then as it comes to the Citadel? Or is there a reason why it just doesn't go from downtown LA directly to the Citadel?
So I don't have the ridership information on just the Citadel Express, but this is the map of all of the ridership. And so I know that, you know, you can see that there are about 38 people on an average weekday that are boarding the Citadel Express at Union Station, and then taking that bus into Commerce. And I know that it doesn't just stop at the Citadel, it stops at a couple other places in Commerce because it's picking up people who might be living in the city that are going into downtown and vice versa. And so I'm wondering, is you know, the Gold Line's, you know, obviously, you know, doesn't operate in traffic, and so it gets you right to downtown. I'm wondering, are you finding that the Citadel Express is slow because you have to wait a long time at Union Station, or is the route itself taking longer than you would like?
Well, I have never taken it, but you know, when I was researching on ways, because our office used to be in downtown LA, so I used every once in a while, if I didn't have meetings out, you know, outside the office, I would take the Gold Line into work. And then I thought, oh, hey, there's a Citadel Express that, you know, that comes to Union Station. So I thought, oh, you know, I can catch the Citadel Express, until I saw that it takes like over an hour from Union Station to get to the Citadel. And I'm sorry, but you know what? I like to sleep in a little bit, and I don't want my commute to be 2 hours. So if I drive, you know, it can take me anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour if there's like an accident or something. But you know, 2 hours to go to and from work. You know, and I realize that I'm probably, you know, I probably shouldn't be complaining, but it's just, it's not convenient for me, because if I don't know exactly what time I'm going to get to the office and I have to be there by a certain time, You know, 2 hours is a little bit too long for me to travel either 11 miles or if I drive direct. So, and I mean, and there are most days that I have to use my car once I get to the office. So, you know, I'm probably complaining for no reason. But if it was possible where if I didn't have meetings in the office, then I would really like to be able to take transit. I mean, now we're working from home, so it's probably moot until we decide to go back into the office. But I was just curious as to why, because somebody else in the office also asked the same thing, like, gosh, that Citadel Express takes a long time to get from Union Station to the Citadel. So.
Yeah, well, I don't know off the top of my head the travel times. I think that's a good point that you're making, though, that, you know, we obviously need to make the travel times competitive so that people are, you know, feel like it's a good use of their time to take transit. I think one thing that we have noted as an opportunity is that, you know, while the Citadel Express connects to downtown, you know, the Gold Line, if you rode it through Union Station all the way out to Atlantic, is, you know, that would be sort of a one-seat ride that would get you a lot closer to Commerce. And so one of the things that we are, you know, in the initial stages of thinking about is how could you create better connections from the Gold Line to the places that people are trying to get to in Commerce. And there are some Metro services that make that connection, but potentially there's an opportunity for a more tailored local shuttle so that it's, you know, that you can take the Gold Line, you know, which operates pretty frequently during the commute times, ride it all the way to the end of the line in Atlantic, and then connect to a service that would take you that last mile or two into Commerce.
Yeah, I hadn't researched that one, you know, and I should have, but I was just thinking that, oh, I mean, if Union Station was the last stop for the Citadel Express, from there it would take, you know, in the morning, probably, I mean, if it, depending on what the route was, if it took like at least 30 minutes or even a little bit more, then my commute would only be about an hour, because it's about 25-30 minutes from Pasadena to Union Station. And so if it was only an hour, then I could see it, because sometimes it takes me about an hour. So, but I should try and research that right into the end of the Gold Line thing.
Well, and certainly, I mean, as you know, we showed a little bit later in the presentation, there are many, many different transit options around Commerce. And part of that's because of the sort of intersection of a bunch of different transit systems coming together. But I think that one thing that is becoming more and more of a realization amongst transit systems, and, you know, we'll be talking about with Commerce as well, is the need to, you know, be more transparent about the best ways to get to and from, and do some marketing to help people understand what those connections are that they can make. I've got one of my colleagues on the phone doing some research for you. He says it would take 1 hour and 9 minutes to take the Gold Line all the way from Fair Oaks in Pasadena, Walnut and Fair Oaks, and then all the way to the end of the line at Atlantic Station. You could transfer to the Metro 762, and that will take you close to the Citadel, but you will have to walk a little bit. So something that you might look into next time you're trying to get to the office and don't need a car.
Great, thank you very much.
This is Thomas, the colleague who you know, just mentioned that it's the 762 goes all the way to Pasadena. You wouldn't need to transfer. It runs directly from Pasadena to close to the Citadel. It's not quite to the Citadel. It's still a rather long walk, but the total travel time is 1 hour and 9 minutes, and no transfer would be required.
And we have 2 more comments coming through. The first is another suggested improvement of adding Wi-Fi on buses. And then the next is a question about, will the PowerPoint be posted somewhere online for people to access after the open house?
Yes, so we are recording this meeting, and so the meeting recording will be available, and just the presentation slides themselves will be available. So definitely want to make sure that if there are people that weren't able to attend tonight, or you want to take another closer look at some of the things that we've shown, that those will be available for you after the open house.
And also, this is Alyssa Mendez with the City of Commerce. I wanted to address that question earlier about ease of access to give feedback on our transportation system in the City of Commerce. There is a way to provide feedback on the CC Transit app. There is a contact us feature. We also have the same contact us on our website, the city's website, but it is a few clicks away. So I will look into making that more prominent, so it's less clicks to be able to contact. So that's good feedback. We'll look into it.
Any other comments from folks on the phone? I know there are a few people that we haven't heard much from. You know, this definitely, if you're here because you want to listen, that's fine. But you know, we definitely want to make sure that if you've got questions or ideas that we can hear them. So without seeing any much more activity on the chat, I'm just going to wrap us up here. So as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, we do have an online survey available both in English and Spanish. If you're watching this on a screen, you can actually just hold, and if you have a smartphone, you can just hold it up to the QR code that's on the upper right-hand corner, and it'll take you directly to that survey. You can also type in the URL that's written on the screen, or go to our website, which is commerceinmotion.org. There's links to the survey there. And that's also where we will be posting the presentation slides in case you want to take a look at it. So as I mentioned, we're kind of near the beginning of the study. That's where we're looking for as much feedback as we can get to sort of point us in the right direction. In terms of the activities that we have ahead of us, we'll be conducting a review of all of the feedback that we hear. We'll be continuing some of our technical analysis, and then developing an initial set of recommendations. So we will take the technical data we hear, the feedback from the community and stakeholders that we've been talking to, and then meld that into a couple of different potential concepts for how we might change Commerce's routes. None of it will be set in stone. It's just an exercise for us to think about based on the data and the input that we have, some different ways that you might restructure the routes to better serve what we hear that people are looking for, and where we think there might be opportunity to improve the transit system. So keep an eye out for some additional meeting invitations and surveys that we'll be launching in the fall of 2020, sometime in the October timeframe, most likely. We'll be able to show you some of those initial concepts and get your feedback. And so you'll be seeing some potential routes, changes to existing routes, potentially new routes, changes to the service span, all sorts of different ways that we might look at making adjustments to better serve the community. And then with your feedback on those initial options, we will identify what is the community's preferred option, and then wrap that into a final report to bring before City Council. So, you know, we've got a handful of people on the phone. Definitely hope that all of you will take our survey, but also, you know, this is something where not everybody has the time or the ability to join us. And, you know, we normally try to get out into the community and talk to people directly, but this is a time that we aren't, you know, able to do that in person. And so we really want to encourage all of you to help us spread the word. If you subscribe to a listserv that has people that are interested in transit or use transit and commerce, please don't hesitate to pass along the information, the website, commerceinmotion.org, and forward people the link to the survey, because we're looking to get as many responses as we can. And the survey will be up through the end of the month. So still got a couple weeks to get those responses back, and we're hoping to hear from as many people as possible. And with that, I'm going to wrap us up for tonight. Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your evenings to attend. And I hope this was informative, and that if you had some comments that you felt like you've been heard, and if not, feel free to send us a follow-up. We've got an opportunity to sign up for email updates on our website, and you can always reach out that way. All right. Thank you so much, and have a good night.